Well, the New York Times reports that Israel plans another week of bombing of Lebanon, this to go with the first week of bombing. Israel says it's trying to destroy the military capacity of the Hezbollah militia and secure the release of 2 captured Israeli soldiers. The effect of the bombing has been to destroy the infrastructure of Lebanon, killing and injuring thousands of innocent civilians. David Barsamian joins us now to talk about the situation there. A frequent traveler to the Mideast, he has met with many high-level Hezbollah officials. And David, I'd like to start there for folks who really may not be familiar with Hezbollah. What are the origins of this organization?
Hezbollah is an Arabic term. Hez means party, a political party. Allah, obviously the party of God. It formed in the early 1980s in direct response to the Israeli invasion of Lebanon in 1982, which led to the death of some 20,000 Lebanese and an 18-year military occupation, a very brutal occupation. If one were to extrapolate to U.S. population, our population of 300 million, and the Lebanese population of only 3 million, 20,000 Lebanese killed, the result would be in the several millions of American citizens killed in Lebanon. I met many people who had family members that had been arrested, tortured, imprisoned, and killed by the Israeli military, and also the Israeli Contra-like mercenary army that it created in the south of Lebanon called the SLA, the South Lebanese Army. It was led by a cashiered Lebanese army officer, Antoine Lahad. And Israel used these mercenaries very much as the U.S. used the Contras in Nicaragua as a proxy force to carry out its policies. So they're very, very bitter memories in Lebanon, widespread over the Israeli occupation, 18-year occupation, and the resultant 20,000 deaths.
So, from your perspective, Hezbollah then grew from that. It's an indigenous group to Lebanon, which is in contrast to what we hear in other quarters of the media, that it is a sort of a puppet of Iran or somehow controlled by Iran.
Yeah, it's easy to say that, to ascribe agency to an outside force. This seems to be a common trope of the Bush administration and administrations before it, who deny the authenticity of indigenous resistance movements. It's always some outside forces. It's foreign fighters. In Iraq, it's foreign fighters. It's Iran manipulating Iraq. Iran apparently has this enormous ability to just pull puppets in the Middle East. Let me tell you a little bit more about Hezbollah, because all the focus is on its military component. And people like Richard Haas, the former Bush 1 and Bush 2 and Reagan administration official, as well as George Mitchell, who has been on all the talk shows incessantly. I've been watching and listening to NPR and CNN and Fox and all the rest. They always say that Hezbollah is a terrorist organization. One can say that. They do carry out acts of terrorism, but they also have a huge social welfare component, which accounts for their enormous popularity with the largest single group in all of Lebanon, the Shia. Again, something that is totally occluded and not mentioned in any of the analyses.
Who are the Shia?
Well, Islam divided in the 7th century, shortly after its founding, into 2 different major groupings, very much like the Roman Catholics and the Protestants, although in Islam it happened almost right away. It had to do with the succession to the Prophet after he died. The Shia are the party of Ali. They believe that the succession to the Prophet should be along bloodlines. That means Ali, who was a first cousin and son-in-law, he married the Prophet's daughter, and his children, the Prophet's grandchildren, that would be Hassan and Hussein, were the legitimate heirs to the mantlehood of the leader of the Ummah, of the Muslim community. And the Sunni, the other group, said no, it should not be based on lineage, it should be based on other issues. So that's why the Sunni caliphs, the successors to the Prophet, such as Omar and Abu Bakr and Osman, are reviled today by the Shia. They are seen as traitors to Islam.
So it's just a different way of saying Shia, a term some of us have come to know through the situation in Iran.
Yes. Iran is a majority Shia country. It's about 90% of the population. Iraq is a majority Shia country, about 65% of the population. And Lebanon now has about 40 to 45% of the population of Lebanon is Shia. They have historically been discriminated against by a ruling economic and political elite comprised of Maronite Christians largely and Sunni Muslims. They have run the show in Lebanon. This is connected to the French colonial rule, where those groups were privileged over the Shia groups in southern Lebanon. And so what you have politically in Lebanon is a very feudal, structural political situation. There has not been a census since 1932 for very good reason, because if it were held, then it would show that today the Shia would comprise a plurality of Lebanese. That is not a strict majority, but the largest single group. And then, therefore, if there were to be a census, the representation of the Shia Lebanese in parliament and in the cabinet would be far greater than it is today. Today, the Shia only have 2 cabinet ministers and 12 members of parliament.
So if you're a Shia in Lebanon, you see that the government has failed to represent your interests. You look to Hezbollah providing things like daycare centers and other basics of social welfare, and you become sympathetic.
Precisely. This is where Hezbollah filled the void. The southern part of Lebanon has historically been the Shia majority area. And I really, I'm distressed when I constantly hear villages and towns and places called strongholds. These are where people live. This is Gun Barrel. This is Longmont. This is Broomfield. These are homes. Yes, the Hezbollah are using the civilian population as shields. This is a question that I'm frequently asked in all the talk show interviews I've been doing the last couple of days, almost exclusively on AM talk shows across the country. Of course they use civilian shields to hide their weapons and to fight the Israelis. Why? Because like all guerrilla movements, they don't have an air force. They don't have helicopter gunships. They don't have navies, and they don't have armored tank brigades and armored personnel carriers. And this is how guerrilla wars have always been fought. I mean, I'm not a historian of the American Revolution. Maybe I should talk to Howard Zinn about this. But I suspect that our founding fathers and their allies, the ones who liberated the country from the British, probably hid in houses and in farmhouses and in cities like New York and Philadelphia among the civilian population, because to go out in the open, as is being suggested, why don't they go out and fight, would invite a massacre.
So it's impossible for the Israeli army to attack Hezbollah without attacking people's homes and innocent civilians.
Yes, and that's why there has been such a huge number of Lebanese casualties. If we're to believe the reports of Robert Fiske, who is probably the premier journalist on Lebanon, that is non-Arab journalists. There are some, fabulous Arab journalists that we never hear from, but, Fiske speaks English and French, and he has a mobile phone and he can be reached. He says that numerous, Lebanese civilians have been attacked. I mean, I think it's inevitable in this kind of warfare.
And certainly the damage to the infrastructure is going to impact the health of thousands.
That's very curious, because on one hand, the Bush administration, which is totally backing the Israeli response to Hezbollah, and Israel itself, they keep saying that we don't want to harm Lebanon. This is not about destroying the existing Lebanese state and government. However, the outcome of the massive destruction of bridges, highways, flyovers, overpasses, power plants, this will certainly damage the Lebanese state. And I think it's fair to say that this response from Israel will actually strengthen Hezbollah. Hezbollah will lose this engagement. There's no question about that. But in the long run, it will create more animosity, more antagonism, both toward the United States, which is seen as Israel's patron, and I think that's a fair description of the U.S. role vis-a-vis Israel. It's massive economic support, military support, diplomatic support at the UN, where it constantly vetoes resolutions critical of Israel, as it did just a few days ago.
Fiske said on Democracy Now! This morning that Hezbollah, in killing Israeli soldiers and kidnapping the two soldiers, relied on the cruelty of Israel's response.
Indeed, I think that's very accurate. But one has to ask, why at this moment would Hezbollah initiate a military operation against a foe, an opponent that is obviously, in Fiske's own words, a nuclear-armed superpower, far and away the most powerful military force in the entire region. Its air force, comprised of 400 to 500 F-15, F-5s, F-15s, F-16s, probably second only to the United States. Now, why would it provoke an attack? I mean, it would seem on the surface an insane thing to do. Well, I think there are a couple of explanations. One is to show solidarity and relieve pressure with their Islamic brethren in Gaza, who are undergoing a similar type of bombardment, even though those Muslims, almost entirely Muslims in Gaza, are not Shia, they're Sunni. But they feel this solidarity to show some kind of support. There's also the issue, again, not discussed in the media, and I was surprised that Robert Fiske has not even mentioned this. There's a 25 square kilometer area of Lebanon that is still held by Israel. This is called Shaba Farms, Shabann, farms, the English word. It's an agricultural tract right where Israel, Lebanon, and Syria meet. I could see it. I was, right there at the border. They want that territory returned, as Syria wants the occupied Golan Heights returned, as the Palestinians want East Jerusalem, which has been annexed by Israel. These areas, by the way, have been formally annexed into the Israeli state. They're not, technically speaking, anymore occupied territories in the way that the West Bank still is and Gaza was. They have been invaded, occupied, and annexed into Israel formally. There's also the question of Lebanese prisoners that that have been held in Israeli jails, and they wanted some kind of prisoner swap. Hassan Nasrallah is the charismatic leader of Hezbollah. He's a very interesting figure. I couldn't get to interview him when I was in Beirut, in the very suburbs, again, routinely called Hezbollah strongholds. These are massive apartment blocks. If you have seen some of the pictures, you can see how the death of civilians is inevitable when you're bombing. I mean, the idea of pinpoint bombing and surgical strikes should be taken with a kilo of salt.
We're speaking with David Barsamian of Alternative Radio, discussing Hezbollah, Lebanon. David has recently returned, traveled in the Middle East, and met with many Hezbollah officials. This is KGNU, listener-supported community radio, 88.5 FM and 1390 AM. Back to your discussion of the leader of Hezbollah.
Yes, he has an interesting background. His father was a revered Shiite cleric, and he studied in Najaf in Iraq, which is like the Shia Vatican. I mean, that's where you go. It's where the
holy
major
city.
Where the major seminary is. Yeah. If you want to become a cleric and rise in the hierarchy, that's where you go to study. That's where Ayatollah Khomeini was for a number of years. Now, when he was there, Sheikh Hassan Nasrallah, he's called also Sayyid Nasrallah, he studied with the Iraqi cleric, Muqtada as-Sadr's father. I know this might get a little complicated now, but Sadr, S-A-D-R, is a very admired and revered Iraqi cleric who was killed by Saddam Hussein. And it is his son today in Iraq that leads the Mahdi Army, M-A-H-D-I, which is one of the major resistance forces to the U.S. So there is that familial connection between Lebanon and what is going on in Iraq. Now, the first leader of Hezbollah was Sheikh Abbas Musawi. He, his wife, and his 3-year-old daughter were killed by the Israelis in 1992 in a helicopter gunship attack on their car. And then Nasrallah became the leader of Hezbollah. He was a guerrilla commander before he assumed political leadership of this organization. So he had that cachet of having actually fought and directed operations against the Israeli occupiers in southern Lebanon. People that may despise Hezbollah and Nasrallah say several things about him, that he is courageous and that he is incorruptible, which is not something that should be understated in the context of Middle Eastern politics, particularly Lebanese politics, which is notoriously corrupt. Bribes, favors given, payoffs. Robert Fiske's favorite character in Lebanon, the now, the assassinated former Prime Minister, Rafik Hariri, was well known to be engaging in all kinds of financial deals, to create his $1 billion of capital that he amassed, and then he became Prime Minister of Lebanon. Let me talk just a little bit more about some of the social welfare programs, because Hezbollah operates schools, as you mentioned, daycare centers, training facilities, literacy centers, clinics, providing prenatal care and postnatal care for women. So it's not accurate simply to describe it as a military operation or a terrorist organization. And that's why they're popular with the Shia, because the Lebanese government, because of racist reasons, has always looked down on the Shia, with some exceptions. I mean, there are some rich Shia in Beirut that have made a lot of money, but the Shia in Lebanon have always been regarded as sweepers, as garbage collectors, as slaves and servants, and that has been the feudal structure of the country. And here you have now an organization that comes along and says, you are somebody, you count for something, and we represent you.
We haven't talked about Syria yet, and this is frequently stated in other parts of the media. President Bush stating it, I believe, on a microphone that he thought was off, that was actually on in what he thought was a private conversation with Tony Blair, that Syria is calling the shots, and if Syria would just tell Hezbollah to back off, they would. Do you agree with that statement?
I would just say...
And what is the role of Syria?
Parallel to that, the U.S. is calling the shots in Israel and could simply call Tel Aviv and say, back off. But let's just talk about Syria. Of course, Syria is interested in what's happening in Lebanon. Lebanon was part of Syria until it was separated by the French colonialist empire in 1920. So there's been very close cultural, linguistic ties between Syria and Lebanon. Lebanon was created, by the French as a kind of enclave to provide a port in Beirut for French commerce and to be a wedge there to separate the largely Sunni population of Syria and the Maronite Christians who were favored by the French in Lebanon. Again, it's always this divide and rule and playing one group off against another. I mean, the mosaic is complicated. I don't think it's impenetrable. You can understand what's going on, but the simplistic kind of platitudes that you hear from Larry King or Robert Siegel and Cokie Roberts in the media are just breathtaking. But Syria does have influence in Lebanon. It was invited into Lebanon in 1976 by the Arab League to intervene in the Lebanese civil war, which had broken out the year prior, and it remained in Lebanon for 29 years until it withdrew under not just internal Lebanese pressure, but also from the international community, which wanted to see the Cedar Revolution flourish. I think everything that's happening today is destroying whatever seeds the Cedar Revolution had planted in terms of a democratic, pluralistic, prosperous Lebanon. But I don't think that it would simply take a call from Damascus, from Bashar al-Assad, the president of Syria, to Sheikh Hassan Nasrallah to say, back off. I think that Hezbollah is quite independent in terms of its support within the Lebanese population. They are dependent on Iran. This is what they told me up front. I mean, if you go into the Hezbollah headquarters in southern Beirut, as I did, on the wall you see pictures of Ayatollah Khomeini, Ayatollah Khamenei, the current leader of Iran, and I asked them, this is Lebanon. Those guys, they're not even Arabs. Why do you have their pictures on the wall? Well, they said, when you go to a Catholic church in Minnesota, or maybe Minnesota is not a good choice, in California or New Mexico, and you look up on the wall and there are pictures of the Pope and the Vatican, it's the same thing. We feel allegiance to our co-religionists. And that's why we have them on the wall. Iran is primarily financing Hezbollah. They have the money. Syria is not a wealthy country. Iran, thanks to almost $80 a barrel oil, it has a significant amount of revenue, and it's been giving some monies, tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars, as well as weaponry to Hezbollah. And we see that with some of now these long-range missiles. The point I also like to make is the idea of an eye for an eye. As Gandhi said, it leaves everyone blind. How to formulate a structure where Israel can live within secure, well-defined borders, how to create a structure and also a culture of acceptance, of tolerance, of appreciation, maybe that's going too far, for the different communities living there. These are very, very small places. I mean, I've been to Israel, I've been to Lebanon, we're talking about, from here, from these studios in Boulder to, let's say, Fort Collins. That's where the Israeli border is. It's not a huge area, and how to create that by further inflaming the situation, as the United States has done, I think, quite recklessly by interfering in. Not just in Iraq, but also in Lebanese internal affairs. And this has a long history. Again, we live in the United States of amnesia, as Gore Vidal says. In 1957, the U.S. intervened to secure Camille Chamoun on the throne in Beirut as the president of the country, a Maronite Christian. The next year, the Marines occupied Lebanon.
Well, and in a region where attack, response, attack is the order of the day. I mean, Israeli spokesperson quoted on the BBC earlier this morning saying, well, what do you expect us to do when an unprovoked attack and kidnapping of our soldiers occurs?
This is the central issue. I mean, how to create structures that will lead to a modus vivendi. I mean, maybe appreciation is too much. I don't have to like you, but you're there, I'm here. How can we live together? How can we create a Middle East that will be peaceful? I think the U.S. role has been extremely negative, and I think the Israelis are largely deluded about what they're trying to do in Lebanon. If we're to believe their own statements, just yesterday, the Israeli Consul General in New York, Arya Mikel, on MSNBC with Tucker Carlson said, we're doing Lebanon, by invading Lebanon, by bombing the country and blowing up bridges and the infrastructure, he said, we're doing Lebanon a huge favor. maybe someone might want to ask the Lebanese if they feel that this is a huge favor. I think that would be a fair question. And then just last night, again, on another cable news network, CNN, the Israeli ambassador to the UN said, we want Lebanon and Beirut to return, and I'm quoting, to a fun-loving entrepreneurial center, that it was before. Again, you might want to check with the Lebanese if that's their vision of how they'd like their country to be.
David Barsamian is the host and producer of Alternative Radio and has visited Lebanon and the Middle East several times, meeting with several Hezbollah officials. That's all the time we have this morning, but we will continue this conversation and take your phone calls in addition to talking with other guests about this issue today at noon on Metro. We hope you can join us for Metro today. David, thanks, and we'll see you at noon.
Thanks, Sam.